We last spoke almost 2 years ago now. What have you learned in those last 2 years that has evolved your own thinking or has developed your own thinking in any way? If we reflect on the last conversations we had around glucose spikes and sugar and the health consequences and diets, is there anything you've learned in those 2 years that is interesting and new?
Oh, absolutely. I think mostly the impact of glucose on mood and on relationships. For example, there's this fascinating study that took married couples and they gave the husband and the wives a little voodoo doll representing their spouse. And the researchers told the participants to put a little pin in the voodoo doll every time their spouse annoyed them. At the end of the 2 weeks, the researchers counted the number of pins in the voodoo dolls, and they also measured the participants' glucose levels. They found that the people who had the most glucose lows had put the most pins in the voodoo doll representing their spouse.
Wow.
So it's just an association, but it's interesting. And scientists then found that when you have very unsteady glucose levels, it impacts this neurotransmitter in your brain called tyrosine that manages your mood. So it seems that with unsteady glucose levels, your mood is less stable, which could then correlate to you being more annoyed at your spouse. So I think studies like this have really blown my mind.
What's going on when we go through a glucose crash per se?
So glucose is your body's energy. So your brain is constantly monitoring how much glucose do we have in our bloodstream. And steady glucose is great. When your glucose levels crash, this indicates biologically that you're out of fuel. And this is a powerful signal to your body and your brain to say, alert, alert, we need food, we need more glucose. And so it creates all these downstream consequences on your mood. You become hangry. All you think about is food. You're in a bad mood. You're like, I need to eat something. You look for a banana. You look for a cookie. It can also activate the craving center in your brain that says, Stephen, go find some chocolate. And science has shown this. Low glucose levels creates a cascade of consequences on how we feel and what we seek. Now, what's interesting is that back in the day when we had low glucose levels, I'm talking like hunter-gatherer times, they wouldn't arrive so quickly because we didn't have these big spikes that then led to these big drastic drops. It was more, we ate in a more balanced way with less sugar, obviously. So when our glucose became low, it was a bit more gradual. Today, because we have access to all this sugar, we can spike our glucose very quickly, and as a result, it then crashes very quickly. So the effects are pretty much immediate, and they're very intense. All of a sudden, you go from feeling okay to your brain being in alert mode, we need to find more fuel. So we've dysregulated our glucose levels to the point where it's impacting us in a very unnatural way.
Is that in part because we modify our food, even fruit? When I looked back through the history of fruit, apples, bananas, etc., looked extremely different before they were modified to be juicier and sweeter, etc.
Completely. It's like dogs. So all the dog breeds today, from Chihuahuas to Golden Retrievers, they all come from wolves. Humans have been breeding wolves together to create these different species of dogs. They all have that ancestor of the gray wolf. So humans are very good at breeding natural things to serve their purposes. And when it comes to fruit, it's the same thing. So as you say, if you compare like an ancestral banana or an ancestral apple to a modern one, they look completely different. And you should pull up these photos. They're fascinating. Ancestral banana, tiny, full of fiber, full of seeds, not very sweet. And then modern banana, full of sugar, low in fiber, really easy to eat. So that's the first thing people need to know about fruit. Fruit is not natural. Fruit is the product of human engineering. However, a piece of whole fruit also contains fiber and water. So even though it's been bred to have a lot of sugar, the fiber and the water reduce how quickly the sugar arrives in our bloodstream, making it more or less okay for us. But the problem comes when we denature that piece of fruit, meaning if we remove the fiber. For example, if we take an orange and make an orange juice, what are we actually talking about here? Actually, oranges are not even a natural fruit. They were invented thousands of years ago by crossing other species of fruit. To make an orange juice, you throw away part of the orange. You throw away the solid part, which is the fiber. So you're left with the sugar of a very sugary fruit, water, and no fiber. As a result, you're getting a very unnatural amount of sugar in your bloodstream with no fiber to protect the spike. So a big, big glucose spike. And people often say, oh, well, fruit has vitamins in it, so therefore orange juice must be better for you than Coca-Cola. That's actually a total myth. If you compare a glass of orange juice to a glass of Coca-Cola, it's the same amount of sugar, about 25 grams. And the sugar in the can of Coke and the sugar in the glass of orange juice they're exactly the same. They're glucose and fructose molecules, and your body absorbs them in the exact same way. Your body does not make a difference between sugar from an orange and sugar from a sugar beet.